just a couple minutes late. Good morning, everybody. It's just 10 o'clock. Thank you for joining UNC Health for another media briefing. Today's 30-minute Zoom will focus on coronavirus vaccines, research, clinical trials. If our experts can't answer your questions during this briefing, feel free to follow up with us after the Zoom. And another housekeeping note, please keep your lines on mute until you want to ask a question. We are recording today's Zoom and we will share links to audio and video shortly after the briefing. I'll email those out, and if you don't get them, feel free to contact me. Now I'd like to hand it off to my colleague, Brittany Phillips, who will introduce our expert guests, and then they will make a few opening remarks, and then we'll open it up for media questions. Brittany?
Hi, everybody. First, we have Dr. Cindy Gay. She's a practicing infectious diseases clinician and the medical director for the HIV Cure Center at UNC. Her research background includes clinical trials and translational research focused on HIV cure, including phase 1-2 clinical trials involving novel HIV vaccines, agents to reverse HIV latency, and novel or adapted immunotherapeutic strategies to improve immune responses to HIV infection. Dr. Gay is currently the site principal investigator at UNC, site for study evaluating the Moderna. Next, we have Dr. David Wall. Dr. David Wall co-leads a respiratory diagnostics center at UNC Medical Center in Chapel Hill, where outpatients are tested for COVID-19. He also attends on the inpatient COVID-19 service. Dr. Wall is part of the leadership team for a large nationwide NIH-sponsored trial testing hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin to treat patients with COVID-19. Last, we have Susan Peterson, clinical director of the UNC HIV Clinical Trials Unit for the Institute for Global Health and Infectious Disease. And she's helping lead the UNC COVID-19 research.
Cool.
Susan coordinates research efforts at the domestic and international research sites and provides training and mentorship to international researchers. Her research interests include clinical research implementation, international HIV trials, and ethics. Thank you all for joining us, and Dr. Cindy Gay, you can begin with your opening remarks.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and
again,
thank you very much.
It's a 3.5-minute one, if you can. So we'll try to get as
All right,
much
was
as
that for
we
me?
can, because these are all good questions.
Hey, could I get everybody to mute their lines?
Thanks, Alan. Good morning, everyone, and thanks very much for the interest in the work we're doing. We're really excited to be able to tell you that UNC has been selected as a site for a very large COVID vaccine study with a vaccine produced by Moderna. We're really excited for a few reasons. One is that, of course, we are happy to have our community benefit in case the vaccine is found to be effective. I think the other reason that we're quite grateful to be part of this study is just to be able to have our group and people in our community be a part of solving this really big problem of the COVID illness and the pandemic. The study is a very large study. It's being conducted across multiple sites in the US, approximately 89, I believe. At UNC, we're hoping to enroll approximately 500 participants in this study. We do have a relatively short time for enrollment across all the sites, so we're going to work as hard as we can to get as many interested people onto the study here at UNC. One thing that I think is important for both the media and people hearing your message is that we're really quite committed to having people participating in the study who are from communities that have been hard hit by the pandemic. The reason for that is perhaps obvious, but for those who are at risk to have a chance to benefit from the vaccine if it's effective, and also benefit those around them, including their families and their larger communities. So we're really hoping that those who will hear what you have to produce and perhaps hear our voices will take a minute to think about whether they themselves or those in their community have been impacted by this pandemic and think about participating in the study. We believe as a group that we are going to need as many tools in the box, from a vaccine to treatment, and we're really hoping to be able to help provide those answers and guide us going forward. So one thing that I would say for those who might be interested is there is one particular easy way to let us know if you're interested in participating in either the Moderna vaccine study or other studies that may be coming down the road, is to go to an online registry, which allows you to basically let us know you're interested in participating in COVID prevention studies and treatment studies that may be coming. It's at www.coronaviruspreventionnetwork.org. If you forget that, you can simply Google Coronavirus Prevention Network Registry. And there you can enter your information, and also we'll run through a few questions about individuals' risk for COVID vaccine so that we can really prioritize those who have the most to benefit to allow them to participate in this study. I'll stop for now. David or Susan, is there anything you want to add on top of that?
Yeah, this is David. So thank you. And thanks everyone again for being interested in this and giving us a chance to talk about what has really become a passion for us. I think as Cindy laid out, we are really, I think, excited about the opportunities we have at UNC to be a leader in trying to get us as close as possible back to normal. We focused a lot, and I think you all have focused a lot on clinical response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the drive-throughs, the people in the ICUs, the frontline workers who are really making a tremendous difference. I think less attention gets paid now to this second wave, which is the clinical research response. And that's what we're part of. We're part of the first, certainly wear our scrubs and go in and do our face masks and take care of people. But at the same time, we've got to come up with bigger solutions than a one-on-one. And so Cindy, myself, Susan, others, a group of us have really taken on trying to find a good vaccine, a vaccine that's safe and effective, and also treatments. A vaccine will be really, really important, and Cindy's leading that effort for UNC across the state. But even if we have a good vaccine, there's still going to be people who get infected and need treatment. And so at the same time that we're launching this first of maybe several vaccine trials until we find the right vaccine, we're also launching a clinical trial of treatment and different types of treatment. And so there's exciting treatments that are out there right now. And we're about to start within days. And I think it's going to be a really heavy lift trying to get people who just find out that they're positive for being infected with COVID-19 and sign up to get a treatment to prevent them from getting sick. For all the work we're doing, we're spending a lot of time and effort to make sure that the people that we enroll in these studies reflect the pandemic here in North Carolina. So we want to make sure that those who have been heavy hit, those who, because of their essential work, because of their living situations, because of all the historic and structural reasons that they may be bearing a burden of COVID-19 disproportionately, are also clearly represented appropriately in our studies. So there's a lot of outreach that's going on right now to make that happen. And so this is another way that we can get the word out that we need help. We need people to literally roll up their sleeves and help us get back to normal. And we're not going to get back to normal if we're all spectators, and that there's not folks who are willing to step up, including ourselves. And I myself, if I could volunteer for any of these studies, I will, because I think it's really important for us to work as a community and individually to protect ourselves, protect our neighbors, protect our loved ones. And we're not going to be able to do that unless some of us step up and say, I'm willing to be involved in that study. I think it's important to find this. And it's important for my community and people who look like me to find a solution so that we could get back to the way we were. So I think what you're going to hear today is how we're doing that. We take this very seriously. This has taken over pretty much all of our lives, and we're very dedicated to this, but we're on the cusp of some really great things. Dr. Gay's efforts in really leading this incredible vaccine effort and the treatment studies that we're doing, I think are really just emblematic of what we're about to do.
Susan,
And it doesn't happen without people on the front lines. And so Susan Peterson, who's here, she is literally rolling up both sleeves every day, seeing patients, has been doing it from the beginning, seeing people who are newly diagnosed with COVID-19 and willing to take novel experimental medicines to see if it could prevent them from spreading the virus, prevent them from being hospitalized. So Susan can tell you a little bit more about what that's like on the day-to-day basis, but that's the kind of people who are making this happen.
Yeah, hey, I'm joining you from our research clinic now, where we have a busy morning enrolling participants who are been recently diagnosed with COVID-19 onto our research trials. But we're super excited to also start on the prevention side of things. We've been working for, at least 6 weeks. Our research staff has been working to prepare this vaccine trial for implementation. We are lucky in that we have a robust research unit here, and we could pivot to COVID research in many different ways, prevention and treatment. And so now 6 weeks later of hard work, we're ready to get started with our COVID-19 vaccine. We've been really encouraged by the interest we've received. Cindy had already expressed to you that we have a registry available for participants, potential participants to join, to express interest in becoming a part of the vaccine response. That registry again is coronaviruspreventionnetwork.org. That's the most efficient place for people to go and express their interest in being on one of these studies. It is a direct link to us and provides us with some necessary information to know about factors that might make a potential participant most at risk for COVID-19. We've also received lots of phone calls and emails, and we're following up on those to make sure that everybody that contacts us gets a response. We're really excited to actually be here and have the media be part of our response. We feel like that the media is really a good opportunity for us to get the word out to the people that we most need to be aware of the opportunity, so we can bring that opportunity to them. So we're excited to have you highlight this study and get the word out to those populations. We most are interested in finding people of color who will be at risk because of, for COVID-19, people with underlying health conditions that also make them at risk for adverse outcomes. And we're excited to get started. Thanks very much.
David, Cindy, Susan, thank you so much. Media members, please step up, take yourselves off mute, and fire away with some questions.
Hi, this is Jason DeBruin with North Carolina Public Radio. You maybe saw this morning, or actually I'm not sure when it was published, but the News and Observer co-published a piece with ProPublica that highlighted some mishaps that happened when researchers were, for instance, bitten by a mouse in research trials. Understanding that, you know, those kinds of early studies certainly are different than a vaccine trial. It raises some questions about safety protocols at UNC. Now, I realize in the story it says that UNC has declined to comment, so I'm not asking you specifically about any of those cases, but I wonder if you might address any safety concerns that people would have, particularly in light of what's been reported about some, you know, protocol mishaps in UNC's past.
Yeah, I think Jason, it's a good question. I think the clear distinction, as you pointed out, is that bench laboratory research is very different than clinical research. It's a completely different world. It's you know, difference between radio and TV, right? So, you know, or print and TV. It's just a huge leap. So very, very different protocols, different safety policies, different operations. And there's pretty much a divide. So I don't think any of us can really talk much about handling of animals. And I don't really think it would be fair to say that that reflects at all about the safety of human beings in our studies. We take that extremely seriously. And one thing we didn't mention that I think is really important is it's really remarkable that the platform that's being used for COVID-19 clinical research is being built upon the decades of HIV research that we've been doing in North Carolina really safely and successfully. Research that has gotten us the drugs that we have now that are extremely potent yet safe, that were studied in clinical trials that look a lot like these clinical trials, including prevention trials. So I think that I am really confident that what we have in place here is an abundance of caution. Even with the rapidity with which we're doing what we're doing, we are really, I think what Susan said was 6 weeks of preparation at least, just for really even thinking about starting the vaccine study. So it's a long answer to say that I think this is, apples and oranges, and that we think that this is being done in a really, we wouldn't do it in any other way except for in a really safe and rigorous manner.
Morgan Norwood with ABC 11. You kind of hinted on this talking about the studies on HIV and how that helps with this particular vaccine. Can you go into a little bit more depth about that? What are the similarities between, what you're finding with HIV to coronavirus?
Cindy, do you want to talk about that? Because you've done a lot of prevention work.
Yeah, I think there are two ways to look at it. One is that for the virus itself, and then two, the research networks that we've built to be able to study it. So although we know about coronavirus, this is a new coronavirus, and you flash back more than 30 years ago, HIV was a virus we knew nothing about. We didn't know how to treat it. We didn't know how to protect people. And it's exactly what David was saying. Over that amount of time, really dedicated people who were willing to step up really in a sort of a fearful time and build these networks. So one of the reasons why the response to HIV has been so well orchestrated and successful is that you have groups across the United States and internationally now who are sites that can implement a single study across multiple sites to have the number of participants you need to have to be able to answer a question. To sort of get back to the safety issue, over, again, these decades of doing this, there are very well established protocols for making sure that we implement this in the safest, the right ways with so much oversight. So it's really one, as infectious disease doctors, we've all been taking care of these patients in the hospital. This is in a way personal to us and within our careers. So we're ready to put other things on hold to focus on this issue and basically allow those networks and the people that run them and the trust that we built up in the communities within which we work to, as Susan sort of pivot it to this problem. So I think building on that just allows us to respond so much quicker, allows us to respond better, allows us to be in a place where we could even think about being able to implement such a large study across other sites. So I think that's where the similarities in it. It's one, the recognizing we have a new virus we have to address, and then using all this existing infrastructure and expanding it a little bit to be able to do this well, to be able to do it working together with groups we know and how to do it, and being able to respond quickly. But I did sort of want to, in a way, tie this into the question about safety, because I know there have been some things in the media and some polls expressing some people's concerns about how quickly this is moving. And I would like to spend a few moments on that because I think it's important. I think the difference in the pace of responding to the COVID pandemic is all coming from the urgency and the need that we see. So typically in developing a vaccine from phase 1 to phase 2 to a large study like this, it gets spread out over more time because the urgency is not as great. For this, we're not missing any steps, but we are asking people to literally put other things on hold and work nights and work weekends and have the next study ready to go when we have the safety data from the earlier study. So it's not that steps are being skipped. It's not that any of the normal review, the normal oversight, it's all happening. It's just we're asking people to do it quicker, to put other stuff on hold, to prioritize, I guess is the best word I can use, and asking so many people to prioritize their part in a study. It's I think recognizing how much and how many people are doing that across the United States to make a vaccine study like this happen.
Hi, this is Aaron Thomas with WRL News. I had a question. I understand that this is focusing specifically on clinical research, but I was curious as far as the latest status on the vaccine Moderna, and I understand that you also are looking for participants. But what's the status on this vaccine? And let's say you get what you want out of these participants. I guess where do we move forward with this vaccine?
Yeah, so the status with the vaccine is that this is a phase 3 large study. Sort of I mentioned the goal is to enroll approximately 30,000 participants to be able, which is what's needed to show whether the vaccine would both prevent infection but also prevent illness from acquiring SARS-CoV-2. So there's data from phase 1, there's early data from phase 2. We'll be updated on that. The study has started opening to enrollment across other sites, I think about 3 weeks ago. And as I mentioned, we're hoping to start enrolling next week. So that's where the sort of status is. This is one of a handful of vaccine studies that are being implemented, not all the same sites, but across these networks with multiple sites. To be honest, we're hoping that they all work. There's no ownership, or I'm not more in for Moderna to be more successful than another vaccine. We would all be happy if they all worked, which would allow us to, one, be able to manufacture more vaccine, right, from different companies and make it more accessible. So that's really the goal. There are multiple studies, but the goal is to find which ones are effective and make those available to people at risk, and frankly, everyone, if we have enough vaccine to do so.
Hi, this is Jamise Price with CBS 17. I wanted to know what are some of the known challenges at this point for this study, and two, how do you handle the apprehension from certain communities about getting the vaccine or participating in this study when they have the history of maybe the Tuskegee experiment in their mind. So how do you handle that apprehension about certain communities being a part of this study?
Well, I could start, but I'd love for Susan to chime in about some of the challenges. I would say the challenge is, to go from learning that you're going to be a site for such a large study, and particularly during the pandemic where we have fewer staff that are actively working in our offices due to trying to protect our own staff, for example. So going from that to being ready to enroll 500 participants is a big challenge. We're bringing on more staff, and that takes time, and just the preparation. But again, we've done this for so many times for so many studies. It's just a larger number that will go through the same process that we're used to doing. I'm glad you asked the question about appealing to the communities, because in fact, the communities that we really would love to have them participate in the study are those who are perhaps less trustful of research in general and health systems, and understandably, we understand that. I think our hope is that people will recognize that UNC and many other infectious disease research groups are the groups that are really working for these communities. Our work has mostly been in HIV, which is predominantly African American in North Carolina and elsewhere, and increasingly impacting the Latinx community. So we are already invested in these groups and hoping that people will be willing to think about that, maybe think about whether now would be a time to open up that trust a little bit. I think the message that we would like for you to help us get out is the reason why we are sort of focusing on those groups. and not for, we still hear the words guinea pig thrown around a lot within research, but that's not why we're appealing to them. We're appealing to them because we know that the Latinx community has been the most impacted in the United States and the most impacted in North Carolina. They account for a grossly higher normal of COVID cases and cases coming into the hospital really sick than other groups. So we want to have them benefit from the advances we're making in vaccines and treatment and be a part of that. I think the other thing to understand about research and participating in studies is that we've learned, and there have even been studies about that, how helpful it is for people to sometimes participating and helping us get answers. When you're faced with something as big and daunting as COVID and pandemic and people getting back to work and school, to be able to participate, and it's not a small way to be a participant on a study like this, to be able to participate can be very helpful, gratifying. It can be therapeutic in its own sense to be a part of the answer. But I'd like maybe Susan and David to also comment both on the challenges and how we're trying to address that.
Yeah, we've certainly, as I mentioned before, we've been working really hard for a long time, for a number of weeks to prepare for this, and that has been the most challenging part for the research staff. We've been working long hours. We've been preparing and figuring out exactly how we're going to implement the study in a new environment. We're enrolling people in spaces that may not be the research unit that we're used to enrolling people in, because this isn't the place that is going to allow the right populations to have the best access. So that's taken a lot of brain power, organization for the staff to really figure out how we're going to implement things in a different way, in a different space. So in some ways, I think that the biggest challenges have been accomplished in terms of preparations, and now we're excited to show that we're organized, that we're ready, that we're able to enroll the people that we're aiming to enroll after all those preparations. And to follow up on the other question that was raised, I think one nice advantage we have, as Cindy mentioned, is we are researchers that have for decades now been enrolling study participants who have expressed concern about the research process, that come from backgrounds that make them questioning of what we're doing and why we're doing it. So the nurses we have on staff, the social workers we have on staff, the physicians we have on staff have a lot of years of experience behind them in being able to answer questions for people and being able to convey that that we are implementing the research in a way that is safe and ethical and has an eye towards what their needs are. So that's not the leap for us, is being able to convey those ideas, because we have already have a lot of experience in doing that.
I'll just add really quickly for 30 seconds, because I think those are fantastic responses, is that we do take this seriously. I think if we had more time, we would not only want to serve these communities, but have them co-produce this research with us. We're trying as best as we can. Cindy particularly has been working in Chatham County. This afternoon, I'm going to Sanford to do a testing event there as part of the community building we're doing, reaching out to Latinx communities and the meat processing plant workers there. So, we really are invested in that. I think more and more we're trying to have community members be part of the research team. For our treatment study, the nationwide treatment study, we put together a community advisory board of people impacted, people particularly of color impacted by COVID. And one of the people from LA said, people talk about Tuskegee, but they don't know what Tuskegee was. And Tuskegee was withdrawing or not providing therapy to people who needed therapy for syphilis. In some ways, this is the opposite. We're trying to get people in at the ground level into groundbreaking research that could make a difference. We want people to be included, not excluded. So I think educating people about the history is really important so they understand it, so they understand the legacy, that we understand it and take it seriously. But we're trying to be really inclusive, but at the same time, not overburden communities with the burden of research and again, rolling up all of our sleeves, but we don't want this to be just for people who read about it in the New York Times or listen to this on NPR or see it in the News and Observer. We want all different types of people to have an opportunity to say yes or no to this research.
We're nearing the end of the time, but if we have one or two more media questions, we can take them.
This is Jason DeBruin again. I wonder if I could just jump in one more of a sort of a boots on the ground type question. For people who do participate in the vaccine trial, what, clearly they're given something that is potentially dangerous. What are the requirements for these volunteers? Do they have to quarantine? Can they be around only their families? What are the restrictions placed on them, in their everyday lives while they're participating in the trial?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there are no limits on their sort of everyday lives and being in the study. So it's really they would go about, there's no impact on their work or who they surround themselves with. That's not an issue. I would say the only caveat to that would be is if they did during the study period acquire COVID, then they would be under the same guidance that anyone else who is infected with COVID would have as far as quarantine. But that would not come from our group. That would be per local, guidance and regulations. And I would just say, I think to sort of get back to your word about dangerous, I would say there's definitely risks with, being on a study with something that's new. But this vaccine has been given to several hundred people prior to this study. And what we've seen is there are certainly some side effects from vaccines, including ones that are licensed that we give on a regular basis, including the flu vaccine. And what we see with this vaccine are sort of some of the typical side effects that are seen, again, with any vaccine. So I would say that's in some ways to be expected, but not per se dangerous. A lot of the time what I tell some of my patients who I want them to get the flu shot and they don't want to get it because they sometimes get some mild symptoms after they have it, is I tell them that is in some ways your body telling you that the vaccine is doing exactly what we want it to do, which is your immune responding to the vaccine. And your immune response does sometimes produce those symptoms of some low-grade fever or some feeling a little differently. But the intent of a vaccine is to have your immune system respond to it so that it can protect you later on if you're exposed. So I just wanted to make that sense. We do not think that this study is dangerous. We think there are certainly some potential side effects, and we'll be following people quite carefully for those. Thanks.
Richard Stradling at the News and Observer. One quick question before you end. Are there people for whom the vaccine trial would not be good, or people who would not be good for the vaccine trial? And I'm thinking about people who might not be out and about, maybe people who are staying home a lot. But is there anybody else who you might screen out from something like this?
There are not too many criteria that would exclude someone. The individuals who are immunosuppressed or just don't have a fully robust immune system would be excluded from the study, not so much from a safety perspective, but in those individuals, we know from many prior studies that they tend to not respond as well to vaccines. So at this particular point where we're trying to find out if vaccines are effective, enrolling those individuals would just make answering that question more difficult. So those individuals would be excluded from the study. And women who are pregnant or breastfeeding would also be excluded just because it is not a licensed product, for example. Otherwise, there are anyone who has a medical condition that's not stable, or they are acutely ill in some way, would also not be ideal for the study. And those are sort of really the biggest ones. It's a quite open I would say, study as far as who is eligible, with very few people not eligible. But again, sort of as we've said a few times, we are looking to enroll the people who are at most risk for COVID, through, in some ways, no fault of their own because of they're an essential worker, the occupation they have, where they live. We know within our communities that individuals living in elder care facilities have been highly impacted. Really, the risk comes down to people who are in contact with other people on a frequent basis for whatever reason. Those are the individuals who seem to be at the highest risk. So we are trying to prioritize that both for the benefit that the vaccine is effective, and so we can get an answer as soon as possible about whether the vaccine is effective.
Cindy, I'll just add that the other group that would be excluded from the study is also people who've had the SARS-CoV-2 infection prior to this. They wouldn't be people that we would be able to evaluate effectively.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, everyone. David, Cindy, Susan, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. And we will certainly look forward to hearing back from you as this progresses. Media folks, we thank you for joining us this morning. We will send out a link to the audio and video of the recording, the Zoom. And if you need anything more after that, please feel free to touch base with Brittany or myself. And as always, be safe and thank you for your time.